All right, today's date is Tuesday, March 18th, 2014. It's approximately 16:08 hours. It's Detective Stone with the Albuquerque Police Department. We are here at the Family Advocacy Center, 625 Silver. This is in reference to an officer-involved shooting, reference case number 140023683. And present in this interview room, I'm just going to go around the table here.
Agent Hal Page, Mexico State Police.
Detective Zach Stevenson, Repeat Offender Project.
Detective Keith Sandy, Albuquerque Police Department, Repeat Offender Project.
And Luis Robles is a friend.
Okay. And we are here to interview Detective Keith Sandy. Before we start, Keith, I'm just going to go ahead and get some particulars about you. Can you spell your first name for me?
It's Keith.
And your last name?
Sandy.
What's your man number, Keith?
5198.
And who are you employed with?
Repeat Offender Project.
And that's with the Albuquerque Police Department?
Yes.
Okay. How long have you been with Repeat Offender Project?
About approximately a year and a half.
Okay. And how long have you been on the police department?
It's coming up on 7 years now. 7 years in July.
Okay. So basically, Keith, what I want to do is, man, I'm just going to give you the floor, and you go ahead and just walk me through the entire incident, what you remember, what you observed, and just go ahead and start.
On March 16th, Sunday, I was the primary on-call for the Repeat Offender Project. At approximately 5:23 in the afternoon, I received a call from radio control. The control dispatcher told me that Sam 55, Sergeant Jason Carpenter, in the Foothills Area Command, was requesting a taser shotgun in reference to a male who was armed with 2 knives and had advanced or walked towards officers with the knife. I got in my truck and started towards the Foothill Area Command from Edgewood area, and at 5:27 I got a second call from control stating that Sergeant Carpenter requested gangs, and she'd called rope on accident, and I told her just that I would stay en route and disregard on gangs. At 5:31 I contacted Rick Ingram, who was the acting sergeant for the Repeat Offender Project, and notified him of the call out, and I also asked him to respond with me to the address of 812 Piedra Vista Northeast. In reference to this incident, I also asked him to notify K9. It was just in the quick brief that I got from control, and the understanding that I had of the situation is that it was moving too fast and it needed to be slowed down a little bit. Everybody needed to take a step back and assess the situation a little differently, and that's why I requested K9 to accompany myself and Rick Ingram to the incident scene. Shortly after, I notified Rick, 729 Jeff McFarland, and 754 Scott Weimersearch to come up on Robert. They stated they heard our conversation, Rick and I's conversation over the radio about slowing down, contacting K9. I briefed them, telling them about control calling me, the male armed with a knife, and the request for taser shotgun. 754 Scott Weimersearch said that he was going to call Jim Fox, the sergeant of the tactical unit, and brief him on the situation. I told him when I get there on scene that I would wait for their arrival before we stepped off and got involved in the incident. I arrived directly behind me. Officer McFarland pulled up. Then Ken Ronzone, who's also with the K9 unit, pulled up. And then Scott Weimersearch pulled up right behind us. As I was getting my vests out, my taser shotgun, my rifle, out of my truck. The real-time crime center was given a briefing over the radio, referenced the male the uniformed officers were out with. They stated he had a history of running from police, physical confrontations with police, resisting arrest. I grabbed my rifle and my taser shotgun, and myself, McFarland, Ronzone, and Weimerskirch entered the backyard of 812. As we entered the backyard, I could see their backyard bordered an open space area. And as I could see through the open space area, there was a running track and then a steep grade on a hill. I could see a male in a gray, like shop type button-down shirt and black pants, long hair, long beard, and it appeared that he had a do-rag on his head. He was very animated, pointing at officers, and just he led the dialogue. He was primarily speaking. So as I walk out, there's a running trail, and I'll...
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
And so this is the block wall to 812. Pedro Vista.
Okay.
There's a wood slat walk-through gate here, and this is all open space. East of the house is a dirt, gravel type running trail. And there's a large evergreen tree here.
Okay.
As I stepped out, I stopped here with Ken Ronzone, right in this area here. Myself, Ken Ronzone, McFarland, and Weimerskirch stopped here.
Okay.
Up here is a large this is the rock feature, I guess is the way to describe it. There's a lot of rocks, high rocks with a tree that was dead and it was stuck up this way.
Okay.
There's another little trail. It was, I guess, like a game trail. You described. There was a couple of them that went up towards there. There was one that kind of twisted around this way, and one that came around here, and then there was 3 large rocks here, and the male was standing in this area here.
Could you just write like subject or
yes.
whatever, however you want to do it? Yeah, cool.
So, the officers, there was approximately 7 uniform officers in this area between this little game trail and these rocks here.
Okay.
There's a larger rock here. This. So this is myself and McFarland and where we initially stopped. When we get here, Ken Ronzone decides that he's going to move to the north for a northern containment team.
Okay.
I don't see where he goes. Immediately, as soon as I step off, I have the rifle. I have my shotgun taser slung, and Weimerskirch and Ronzone have their dogs. McFarland has a rifle and a beanbag gun. I step out and I have magnified optics on my rifle. I turn the magnification up, and I'm watching the male now. He's up here very animated. These officers are standing the uniformed officers are standing right in this area here. I'm going to guess about in here.
Okay.
And there's one uniformed officer standing right here with the rifle. And he's the only one that I can see with a rifle. These officers here are standing talking to him. They don't have guns drawn. He doesn't have, the male subject doesn't have anything in his hands. They don't have any guns drawn. We decide because of the position, because of the downhill grade, where they're at, it's not safe for them. That's where Weimerskirch gets on the radio, and he does two things. First thing he does is he asks Sam 55, Sergeant Carpenter, to pull his officers back, away from the subject, create a little more distance. Once they get pulled back beyond this rock, this large rock here, he gets on the radio and asks, do we have charges on the male? They respond that the male did produce 2 knives when initially contacted by officers and was in an aggressive manner with them, an aggravated assault on the police officer at that point. And we had good felony charges. Myself, and Weimerskirch, during this time, Rick Ingram arrives. I asked Rick, because I'm holding on with my rifle, I asked Rick to take my shotgun taser. Taser shotgun. McFarland grabs the uniform guy, and they go south around the mountain for a southern containment team. I don't know which. I just saw him on the hill later on with the uniform up there.
Okay.
Myself, Weimerskirch, and Ingram moved to this rock. So I put myself here on the edge of that rock with my rifle on him. The male was very animated. He was talking to us about who we were. He wanted to know who we were with. He asked Skirch, what's your status of office? And Skirch was kind of confused about, when Weimerskirch was confused about that. He finally clarified, wanted to know who we worked for. We told the Albuquerque Police Department. He said that the Albuquerque Police Department couldn't help him. He wanted the Department of Defense, OSI, CID, and the FBI out there at the scene, as he had a matter of national security.
Okay.
He kept talking about the military out there. Weimerskirch asked him if he understood what Posse Comitatus Act was, that the military couldn't be activated for civilian matters. The male said that's why we requested state police. State police is the liaison to the governor. The governor can activate the military to come out here. It's a matter of national security. He talks about having millions in his possession. He talks about there only being enough money to last the United States a couple more months. And he stated he had information for the FBI regarding national security. When he states this, Weimerskirch requests that Sergeant Chris Ware, who was initially up at the top with the uniformed officers, to return to the rock to assist in negotiations. He gets up there, Weimerskirch says, okay, tell him what you need. And the male became irate, screaming, saying, I already told him, he already has his instructions, he already knows what I want. Then he threatens, he said, I ought to come down there and cut you up and take your hat. And then he starts talking about how he collects hats. Then he starts accusing Sergeant Ware of being a child molester. And then states, should I kill you just because of that? It was at the point that we realized that Chris Ware was only agitating him. Chris Ware moved to the bottom of the hill and stood in the area of this running trail and tree, to the best of my knowledge. I never looked back to see exactly where he was. because I stayed on the male with my scope because of the magnification. He would put his hands in his pockets and he'd pull out a cell phone. Because I had magnification, Weimer-Skirch had his dog, and Ingram just had the taser shotgun, I had to give him a narrative of what I saw. Hands in his pockets, he'd pull his hands out, and it would be a cell phone. He'd talk about numbers on his cell phone, having information on his cell phone that he needed to get to the FBI. Then he changes that to going on a rant about child molesters, how homeless people are child molesters. He's not homeless. He said, "I'm not a homeless," is what he said. And then return back to the matter of national security. His rants were just all over the place. Ken Ronzone's dog, while he's ranting, starts barking off the north side there. He walks to the north where I lose visual. He walks to this side over here, and because of this rock formation here with this tree, I can barely see at times just the top of his head. So he walks over here and begins looking out across the horizon, looking for the northern team. He'd come back. As more officers would arrive, I would know they would arrive. It's getting late in the afternoon and the sun is beginning to set. So I could tell more officers were arriving because as they would come through the gate, he had like the magnetic lenses that were tinted. He would take them off and he would utilize his hand to block the sun to see who's coming through the gate.
Gotcha.
So every time I knew, that's how I knew a new tactical officer or somebody would come through the gate, is because he would stop talking and he would block the sun with his hand and look at it. After he looks to see where Ken Ronzone's dog's at and the northern team trying to identify where they're, or locate where they're at, he begins to rant that he was assaulted by the uniformed officers. He says they pointed their guns at him, they assaulted him. Weimer-Skirch told him, "Yes, but you had the knives. So why don't you put the knives down and come down to us?" He refused, said he has the right to protect himself, and again refused to put the knives down. He then changed from protect himself to talking about a motel voucher. He said his identification, he went into how his ID had been stolen. That he wasn't able to get a hotel room. He wanted us to get him a week-long motel voucher. And he went from that into staying he would rather stay in a motel. He didn't really feel that we had to put up the money for a hotel. Motel 6 would be fine. He didn't need to stay, and he started naming off some higher-end hotels. Then he went into stating about the security. He says, "I can secure in a motel room. It'll be secure around me, and I'll be fine and secured in a motel." And kind of just stayed on that for a minute. He stopped at the hotel and became agitated because of my rifle. He started yelling. He says, "The officers are continuing to assault me by pointing rifles at me." He became more agitated, and he reaches his hand into his right hand into his right pocket, and he pulls out a folding blade knife. It was a plastic handle. I could see it real clear through the magnification of my rifle, the optics of my rifle. It was a plastic handle that had the cross hatching on it, and the blade was shaped just as I've drawn here in my notes. It just came to a point, and it had that large lug on the side so that you could open it with your thumb. It was a locking blade type. He held it up while he was ranting about being assaulted, and then he would put it in his pocket, but he put it in his pocket with the blade open and up. So he put the handle into his pocket first and left the blade sticking up. He tells us that the officers assaulted him with the handguns, and what happens if the governor's son was up there underneath that rock. just up there to read a book or to hang out, and if we'd have done the same thing, or if just some random kid was up there, we'd have treated it the same way. During this time, the sun is really starting to go down. The shadows, there's the lack of shadows, and it's becoming a little more difficult to see things around where he's at, and because of the terrain and where he's located on that rock, I start going through like a checklist if it gets dark. I turn on the illumination of my optics, on my CQT. I hold it against, I'm still looking at him through the scope. I hold it against him to ensure that when I turn it on, it's not so bright that it washes him out or affects my ability to see his hands and clearly see him. Once I get it adjusted, next thing I think of is if it gets dark up here, at this point where we're at, I'm the only one that can provide illumination on him, and it is with nothing more than my rifle-mounted light. I knew this was going to pose a problem for us, especially from the mountains there, with no ambient light. So we decided at that point, because it was getting dark, because the lack of the shadows were going away, and it was kind of hard to see him as he moved along this rock picture here, we moved to a larger rock where the uniforms were originally, and stayed here. This allowed us to see the majority of the area where he was at as he would pace. There was still a game trail that came down this way. You're still below him in elevation. Once we got to this area here, he begins to get agitated and he's moving around the rocks, and Anthony Sedler arrives. He has a beanbag gun. He stays with us just for a brief period of time and then leaves and goes to the North Containment Team. While we're there, the male became agitated. He starts to say, "Don't rush up on me because you'll lose." As Weimar Skirch is talking to the male, he becomes upset and begins yelling at Weimar Skirch. And he yells down, "Maybe I should come down there and kill you right now." And he puts his hand in his right pocket and starts walking towards us in an aggressive manner. I still had him in my scope watching his hand. I could only see the upper portion of his hand and wrist. And as he got closer, Rick Ingram came up and pointed the taser shotgun in his direction. It was at that point that the male just stopped, turned around, and retreated back up the hill. He started talking about being in prison when he was up there, when he returned up there. He said, "I was in prison. I just got out of prison 5 months ago. While I was in prison, I was murdered twice and committed suicide twice." It was at that point he pulled a knife from each pocket and held it about chest level, and again was ranting about how he'd been murdered and how he committed suicide. At the end of that, he turned the knives around, put both of them in handle first, and blades up. Weimar Skirch asked him at that point, what would it take to get him off the hill? He says that he goes back to the week-long voucher at the motel. He wants that week-long voucher. What are you guys doing to get that week-long voucher at the hotel? And Rick Ingram tells him, we can't do anything until we get off of this mountain, we get off this hill. Then, as we're talking to him about that, he sees the state police sergeant, Chris Ware, at the bottom again, and becomes agitated again. He yells at him, saying, "I'm going to kill these guys, but I'm going to bring them back to life, and I'm going to come down and kill you." and he says, "I'm the angel Jesus." And he had earlier gone and gotten a sandwich from his camp, and it's at that point he threw the sandwich at us. He'd also had a dinner roll from like Church's chicken. He threw that at us as well. When he threw the sandwich at us, it kind of landed next to us, and the dog tried to get it. And everything stopped for a minute, and he looked and he said, "Well, he can have it. I got another one." And he got calm there for a minute. It was during this time that we began to put a plan in place. Weimar-Skirch had dialogue with Sergeant Fox regarding the sun going down and it becoming dark. And once we're in the dark, it's going to put us at a grave disadvantage with him. We began to put a plan in place, a layered approach, which we would use a flashbang, a taser shotgun, and the dog. Prior to initiating our plan, we moved more parallel with him, not up to him, but we moved up to where we were parallel with him on the mountain right here. This is our, I'll just put final position before.
Yeah. Could you move it, like put a line to like movement to your second and then third?
Right, I can number it right here.
Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, perfect.
So this will be our final or third.
Okay.
So now we're parallel with him because the light is getting so low. We need to be at a point where we can see him and see exactly where he's going, reaching in. He had moved some bags around, so I wanted to be able to see those bags, see what was in them, if he retrieved anything from him. And obviously with it becoming dark, containment with the lack of ambient light was going to be an issue. As we got up there, he threatened the dog. He pulled out his knife and said, "I don't want to kill that dog. I love animals, but I will. Don't send him." He goes to his camp, where now that because we've changed our position, I can see all the way across. He's got a stack of clothes laid out. He puts a gray hoodie that says Gap across it. He puts on a baseball cap backwards, and then he tries to put like a camera bag, a small camera bag, over his shoulder, kind of like a satchel, and the baseball cap inhibits, so he takes it off, leaves it off. He says, when he puts the hoodie on, he says, if any blood gets on this, whether it's my blood or yours, I'm going to be pissed. This was a gift. Once he gets it on, he sticks his hands in the pocket of the hoodie and pulls out a small keychain size mace. And he says, "I got mace too." He says, "For the dog. I know dogs don't like that." And so he puts it back into his pocket. He walks to the edge of this rock formation here and picks up the backpack. He has a big backpack just jammed with stuff, and a small blue bag. And he stands up and he starts walking towards us. Weimar-Skirch tells him to put the knives down. He becomes agitated and refuses it. He doesn't want to put his arm. He says, "It's my right to be armed." And he says, "You don't tell me what to do. I'm in charge." He also picks up a large styrofoam cup, like a big, from a gas station, and he starts walking towards us. Weimar-Skirch tells him, "Then put your hands on your head for me." He says, "I'm not going to put my hands on my head." He puts his backpack down, he sets the cup down, he says, "That's what people do when they're getting arrested. You're not arresting me." He walks back up to the top where he originally was, back towards the Northern Containment Team, and yells at him. He's changing the agreement. You can't change the agreement. He then tells us that we're assaulting him, goes into talking about assaulting, and he says if he was at a bus stop or at a bar, he could kill us because we assaulted him. He keeps talking about Skirch changing the agreement. It was during this time the male was obviously contemplating coming off the mountain, but not allowing us to take him into custody. Rick Ingram got on the radio and stated that we needed another impact weapon up at our location. Jim Fox responded by saying he was going to send up a taser shotgun. We told him we already had one. He said, "I'm sending you a beanbag gun now." And Rick asked him to expedite because as the male was rants and wanting to walk off the mountain, but not us being able to take him into custody. Because of our plan, our layer plan with the flashbang, the diversionary device, I had taken it out of my pouch and put it into my dump pouch, which is a larger bag on the side of my vest. It would enable me to retrieve it quickly without it hanging up on any flaps or snaps. As he bent over, Weimer Skirch said, "Bang him now." I took the bang out, put it in my right hand, and I moved over and I concealed my movement, my actions behind Weimer Skirch so he couldn't see it. The male was bent over, he picked up the backpack, picked up the cup, picked up the blue bag, and as he stood up, I threw the flashbang. It landed directly in front of him and then bounced to his right side in a small crevice of rocks, and it deployed from there. When it deployed, it had not the expected results on him. I would have expected him to flinch, to be stunned, to be a bit confused from the overpressure, the noise, and just the light in itself, because he did look at it when it detonated. It didn't show any effects on him. Instead, he took his backpack and his cup and he threw them on the ground in an aggressive manner, kind of, I guess the best way to describe it, the way that I perceived it, was like when the hockey players are on the ice and they're going to fight and they take their gloves, and that's how I perceived it. He took it and just threw it on the ground, and he stood up. It was at that point the Rick Ingram fired a shotgun taser round. Again, expecting what it should do, I didn't see the results we were expecting from it. Rick Ingram fired a second shotgun taser round. Again, not seeing any effects from the shotgun taser. Knowing that you only have 20 seconds with the shotgun taser, the dog was deployed. The dog got to him. As the dog got to him, with those 20 seconds, we began to move towards the male. And from where we were moving, there's a small game trail. And this game trail is literally that. It's a very narrow walkway, and it's got cactus, heavy cactus all along it, and rocks. So your movement is dictated by those rocks and that cactus. As the dog's deployed, he travels along the game trail, and the dog gets to the male. We start to move towards him, and Weimer Skirch, because of the game trail, he steps in front of me, and I can see the male, but Weimer Skirch is between the male and I. As the dog approached him, the male put his hands out in front of him, and as the dog got to him, I couldn't tell if the dog bit him or if he pulled his hands away, but the dog got to him and turned around and came back. So he pulled his hands up and then immediately stuck them into his pockets. As he stuck them into his pockets, the male, Weimer Skirch was between myself and the male. Because of the narrow game trail, I was trying to get around him, he pulled the knives out in both hands, held him at chest level, and took a defensive posture. Once Weimar Skirch dog came back to him, he knelt down and got to the dog. I stepped around Weimar Skirch and kind of over him in a manner to protect him and also to keep him where he's down, where he's not going to rise up in front of my muzzle. I come up, I made the decision that because of the proximity of the knives, that I was going to engage him with my rifle. It's a department-issued rifle, a duty rifle. I'm currently called on. The optics on it are department-issued. Come up, I held center mass, and I went to press my first round. As I did, I observed the male through my scope turn from square lock to me. He began to turn towards the left. As I was processing it, in my mind, I perceived him as now changing his position, attempting to flank us to get around from where he was standing to a different position where the dog wasn't between him and us. As he began to turn, I fired my first round, and I fired a second round, and the male was still standing I could still see him in my scope, still standing. I fired a third round. When I fired the third round, I observed the male fall forward onto his stomach. Once he fell onto his stomach, I heard him say, "It hurts so bad." We began to say, "Drop the knife, drop the knife." He refused. He didn't follow commands. He stated, "I can't move." As after the shots were fired, Ken Ronzone came to us with a beanbag gun. He come up, he announced beanbag. He fired one round, striking him in the lower back and in the buttocks, and then commands were given, drop the knives, drop the knives. With, again, no response. He fired a second round, and again, commands were given, no response. It was at that point that Weimar Skirch deployed his dog. The dog bit the male on the calf, and once the dog began to shake him, again, no response, nothing to show that he was acknowledging the bite. Weimar Skirch went up, offed his dog from the male, and as we were going up, I observed his right hand was bent this way with his palm up and a knife in his hand. I observed his left arm was underneath his head, also with a knife in his hand. Weimar Skirch stepped on his right wrist, cleared the knife from his right hand, threw it above him. Somebody else was on my left, and one of the other tactical officers, I don't know who it was, cleared the left hand. I held on the male while they put him in cuffs. Once he was in cuffs, Dominic Pettis and I stepped up into the area in which he had his belongings, the rock formations there, and cleared those to ensure there wasn't anybody else up in that area. It was at that point where it was getting so dark that we had to utilize the lights on our rifles to clear that area, see within the shadows of the rocks and the dark areas up there. At that point, once he was in custody, handcuffs were placed on him, I stepped off and walked down the hill and returned to the CP.
Okay. And the involvement?
Yes.
Cool.
All right. Just going to go back a little bit. I'm just going to ask, just clarify some questions.
So when you arrived on scene, what were you driving?
I drove my SID truck, a Brown Ford F-150,
Okay.
my issued unit.
And that's a pickup truck?
Yes, sir, it is.
And you'd mentioned that you had put on like your, is it like a tactical vest?
Is that? Yes.
Okay.
It's a green plate carrier with high visibility patches identifying. I read Albuquerque Police Department, police, and then I have another one that says rope on the back of the Repeat Offender Project.
On the back of it?
Yes.
Okay. So you were clearly visible as a police officer?
Yes.
Okay. What guns were you carrying that day?
I carried my personal Iowa Kimber 45, which is personally owned, which I'm called on through the department. I was carrying my JP rifle, which is department issued, which I'm called on. And initially I was carrying a shotgun taser that I relinquished to Rick Ingram.
And just briefly describe, why did you pass off the shotgun taser to Ingram?
I was already holding lethal coverage on the mail for the uniforms that were up there. I didn't want to give it up for fear that while I'm giving it up, something happens, I'm able to address any threats that may arise. I just had him take it off of my shoulders, and I just maintained my position as lethal coverage from the onset to the finish of the incident.
Okay. Would it also be, because I've never actually carried a shotgun taser before, but when you sling a shotgun and it just kind of hangs down there, if you move around, would it be like a regular shotgun, just kind of flap around to get away?
It makes it difficult to navigate the terrain. It's kind of a counterbalance instability in that terrain, especially to be on a lethal coverage.
Okay. So your primary focus on the team was lethal coverage?
Yes.
Okay. And Rick Ingram was taking up the role of non-lethal coverage?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What other equipment did you have on your person at that time?
I have extra rifle magazines, extra pistol magazines. I have flashbang and a handheld taser.
Handheld taser?
Yes.
Okay. Now with your Kimber, did you ever pull that out or use that at all?
No.
Okay. So this guy, he's out up in the foothills area. Can you just kind of describe the terrain that you were seeing when you got there?
It was a large hillside, extremely rocky, and very thick in cactus.
Okay.
The only way to navigate that area is through game trails, narrow paths to cut through the cactus and the rock.
Okay. Were there a lot of areas that were like flat ground, or was it like steep?
No, it was all steep. It was inclines and grades. Even where we put ourselves at a parallel with him, he still was above us. There was a grade in a downward angle towards us.
Okay. And what about his position? Did he seem to have more of a flat area, or was it steep where he was too?
Behind this rock here, it was all flat. There was a flat area right behind here that he paced back and forth. Outside of that, it was downward angles and downgrades outside of that.
Okay. So he was on a more flat, stable ground than you guys were?
Yes.
Okay.
He was at a more advantageous position than we were because of the rocks, because of the level ground, and because of the downward angles and the grades to us, which he could have covered quickly. It definitely would have reduced our reactionary gap. It would close that up. That's why we tried to move up on a parallel with him, so it was more of an advantageous to us to kind of take that away from him.
Okay. All right. And you mentioned a game trail. Did it appear as though this is a man-made trail, or just kind of a natural?
I can't tell you. I know that it's it's worn from whether it be people hiking or animals moving along that area. It's wide enough for one person.
Okay. Okay. But was it a lot different than this trail down here?
This
the
is like
running trail?
a maintained running trail.
Okay.
It's probably every bit as wide as, I would say, probably close to 3-4 feet wide, and it's just gravel and dirt, and it's maintained.
So, I knew you'd mentioned, he had brought up the fact that he was possibly looking for a hotel voucher, motel voucher.
Yes, sir.
And was that something that he was wanting you guys to provide for him?
Yes.
Okay. And about how many times did he request that? Approximately.
3 to 4.
3 or 4. Now, you'd mentioned that when you guys arrived on scene, you had confirmed that you had, or that the officers that initially responded had felony charges on him.
Yes.
And what were those charges again?
It was determined that it was an aggravated assault on a police officer.
Okay. So, the whole intent of this incident taking this person into custody because he had committed those crimes?
Yes, and that was the intent of our plan in our layered approach, where he was given, with each layer of the approach, he would have the opportunity to surrender, to be taken into custody. The flashbang, that was the first layer. He had the opportunity at that point to realize that that was the time for him to surrender and be taken into custody. The shotgun taser, it was realizing that now we're deploying a less lethal munition on him. If he could at that point surrender and be taken into custody. And then the dog deployment, again, the same thing. For him, it's at that point where he had the opportunity to surrender and be taken into custody.
Okay. And you mentioned that there was a point where Weimer Scourge told him to put his hands on his head, or his hands on his head.
Yes.
And he stated that he wasn't going to do that because that's what you do when you go to jail.
His direct quote was, "I'm not going to do that. That's what people do when they're being arrested.
Okay.
And you're not arresting them."
Okay. So he specifically stated you're not going to arrest me, or something to that effect.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You'd stated that throughout this thing he was claiming to be in a bunch of various different government entities, like I don't know, DOD or something like that.
He stated that he wanted to talk to them.
Okay.
He wanted to talk to the Department of Defense, OSI, CID, and the FBI regarding information he had that was a matter of national security.
Okay.
He wouldn't tell us what that was. He never would elaborate on that, only that he wanted to talk to those entities about this information that he had.
Okay. Did that appear like at all credible to you or anyone on scene?
No, he talked about having millions in his possession, and then it went to billions in his possession, and then he began to talk about the economy and how it was going to fail in a couple months, and he had information regarding all of that. So none of that seemed credible. His rants about child molesting, accusing the officers on scene of being child molesters, being the angel of Jesus, none of that was really rational.
Okay. You mentioned when he started speaking about one of the state police officers, he mentioned something about taking your hat, or taking his hat. Do you know what he was meaning by that?
Yeah, he said, "I'll come down there and cut you up and take your hat. I collect hats."
Okay.
So I think that he was wanting the state police hat for his hat collection, and he was going to take it after like he said, "I'll come down and cut you up and take your hat."
Okay. You'd mentioned that this is the time of the day where the sun's going down.
Yes, sir.
In this area of the foothills, up in the terrain where you guys are dealing with, Is that area equipped with like lighting like you would see on the streets or anything like that?
No, as I stated, the only light that could be provided if it got dark there would be my rifle-mounted light, and in order to contain him on that hillside in the dark, it would have been impossible. It would have been trying to keep track of his movement and maintain him in that darkness with the rocks and the trees and cactuses that were up there. It would have been impossible. There was a dialogue between Sergeant Fox and Weimer-Skirch about taking the male into custody prior to it getting dark. Even to have portable lights brought up to our location would have been impossible, almost impossible.
Okay. You had mentioned that you guys were setting up kind of like a perimeter around him, like, with a north unit and a south unit. Based on your training and experience as a police officer, when you're trying to effect arrest on a subject, is it typical that you guys will try to contain him in one area?
Yes. It inhibits his movement in different directions, and it keeps him in a certain area where we're able to control the situation and maintain the ability to watch him and ensure that their safety and ours.
Okay. And you'd mentioned that when you got there, you'd come through someone's yard and out with the fence.
Yes.
Okay. Were there other houses down there?
The whole area of open space there from Copper north is lined with houses. It's a residential area directly west of him. That's why the decision was made as he began to walk off the mountain to attempt to take him into custody, to keep him from getting into that residential neighborhood, to ensure the safety of the residents down there.
Okay. And do you remember what day of the week this was?
Sunday.
Sunday? Okay.
And there were people home because when I arrived on scene, the residents of 812 was out taking pictures of all the police cars in the street. There were other neighbors kind of meandering around looking, kind of trying to figure out what exactly was going on.
Okay. All right. And when you got out there, when you guys were setting up, did you notice that there were any hikers out there or anybody kind of walking around?
When I initially arrived, above where the male was at, I couldn't see him because of the houses, but there were two males up higher on the same hill, just higher above him, and I initially thought that was the male, the offender. I got my binoculars out and began to glass the side of the mountain to clear down to just the rooftops and observed that those were just hikers. They were trying to watch from what was going on from an elevated location. And there was, while we were standing here at the tree and trying to move the uniforms back, there was a couple of people running by. They actually stopped. We told them just to carry on and keep running. There were, throughout the incident, there were people, the north and south containment teams would call out hikers in certain areas, just so that we know that they were in the area. I never had the opportunity to look around other than through my optics at the male.
Okay. But based on what the officers were radioing, and you were aware that there were possibly other hikers in the area?
There was absolutely other people in the area.
So you had lethal coverage, and Ingram had non-lethal coverage, and then Weimer-Skirch, he is a dog handler, correct?
Yes, he was a dog handler.
And he had his service dog with him?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Was he armed with anything?
He had a handgun on his side, but he never deployed it. That's my job as lethal coverage, so that he can focus on handling the dog, ensuring the dog is watching the male, and dealing with the responsibilities that come with being a canine handler. So he doesn't have to worry about a firearm and a dog. My responsibility is to provide him cover with the rifle lethal cover, and as well as for Rick Ingram, because Rick Ingram has a less lethal munitions. And that was my responsibility to provide lethal coverage for both of them.
Okay. And that's typical in the training for you guys having to not only cover for yourselves, but also cover for the dog handler?
Yes, sir. And less lethal officers that are armed with less lethal munitions.
You mentioned that a couple times throughout the incident, he would pull either a knife or two knives out of his pockets.
Yes, sir.
Were they always out of his pants pocket?
Yes, out of his left and right front pocket, he had a set of BDU pants on, so they were loose.
Yeah.
Looked like they were oversized. He would place them in the front pockets of the pants with the blades up.
Okay. But approximately how many times did you see him take the knives out? Approximately.
I know he took them out approximately four times. And then there was the one time where he placed his right hand in his pocket where the knife was at and began to charge towards our location, telling Scourge I should just come down there and kill you now. The 4 times that I saw him.
Okay. You mentioned that at one point he picked up a sandwich and threw it in your guys' direction.
Yes, sir.
And you stated that one of Scourge's dog kind of went after the sandwich?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever seen dogs do that before, like go after food if they see food or anything like that?
I don't know if it was a matter of food or if it was just an object that came
at him.
Came at us. He threw a dinner roll at us also.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what his thought process was behind it. If he was going to range us to see how far we were, so that there was a lot of loose rock, a lot of loose debris up there. If he began using that as missiles, or if he was just in an agitated state and that was what was near him, and he threw it at us.
Okay. You had mentioned that he would get irate and he would say that you guys changed the agreement on him. Did you guys have any agreement with him?
No, he said that he was going to walk down off the mountain. Marvin Scourge asked him to put down his knife before he did that. He refused to do that. Then as he had his backpack on and his cup and started to walk down the first time, Marvin Scourge told him, then do me a favor, put your hands on your head for me. There was no agreement. There was nothing ever told to him that these were the steps we're going to take. And that's where he put the backpack down and started. And he walked all the way to the north and told them he changed the agreement and then came back to us.
Okay. All right. Based on your training when you're trying to apprehend or take someone into custody for felony charges, is it typical to, especially if they're armed with anything, any kind of weapon, is it typical just to allow them to walk away or towards you?
No.
Okay. At one point, you said Ingram had requested another impact weapon to the scene.
Yes.
And Jim Fox said he was going to send a taser shotgun, but he specifically requested a beanbag.
Yes, sir.
Did you know why Ingram wanted a beanbag there as well?
I think it was an extra impact weapon with where the shotgun taser doesn't deploy any kinetic energy. It's not really an impact. It's an electronic device. We wanted the beanbag there as an impact weapon, just as another layer in our plan.
Okay. And you had mentioned that when you had deployed the bang, when you flew the flashbang, it didn't appear that it achieved the desired effect. Have you had previous training with flashbangs?
Yes.
Have you seen the deployment of a flashbang at, say, other suspects
Yes.
in the past?
Yes.
And what is the typical response you see when a flashbang goes off in front of a suspect?
I'm not only seeing flashbangs effect on other people, I've been also subject to their blowing up or detonating in my immediate area.
Okay.
It's 5 pounds over pressure. It's what, 2.5 million candle power light, and it's extremely loud. I've seen flashbangs deployed and it completely knock people off their feet, and I've seen it where it deploys and detonates and it stuns an individual to where it takes them a minute to regain their thought process. When I've experienced a flashbang detonate, your ears ring, it's super hard to hear, and with that overpressure, it takes you a minute to regain a thought process to be able to figure out what you need to do.
Okay. And this type of disorientation, does this give you guys like an opportunity or an advantage to or assist you with taking someone into custody?
It does give us an advantage. It creates a reactionary gap where he is trying to gather himself back together, and it allows us to close distance and get to where we can get to him in a safe manner.
Okay. And you said that with this particular subject, it seemed to affect him differently?
It didn't really affect him as it should have. He looked at it, it landed his feet, bounced to his right, and he looked down at it when it detonated.
Okay.
And the only thing I saw was him stand straight up and throw his stuff on the ground like an aggressive manner.
Okay. So it did not achieve the desired effect that it usually achieves?
It did not.
Okay. Let's talk about taser training. Have you ever felt the effects of a taser before?
Yes.
Okay. So have you ever seen the effects of a taser on another individual?
Yes.
Okay. You had mentioned that Nick Ingram had deployed his taser shotgun twice right after the flashbang?
Yes.
Okay. Did the subject appear to be presenting what you normally would see in a person who is feeling the effects of a taser?
I would expect him to lock up his muscles. It was the conversation once the male put the hoodie on. I could see prior to that he had 2 t-shirts on, then the shop shirt, and then he put the hoodie on. Rick and I had dialogue regarding the fact that there was too many layers on his upper torso for the taser shotgun to effectively, for the barbs to effectively contact the skin. We decided that he needs to attack the lower extremities, the legs, with taser shotgun. We couldn't tell if he was layered in pants. After he fired the first round, and I didn't see the effect. I didn't see his legs lock up. I didn't see him waver. He stood still. The second round was fired again, but not the desired effect. The only thing I saw him do was bend over, and I think that was more to address the approaching canine, where he put his hands out front.
Okay. And while Ingram is deploying this taser, is this at the time where you guys are now closing distance with the subject?
His first round, we were not.
Okay.
On the second round that was fired, I had already taken a couple of steps. I remember stepping off, having a couple steps, and then hearing him fire the taser shotgun again.
Okay.
So we were closing distance at that point.
Okay. And while you guys were closing distance, do you remember giving, or anyone giving, verbal commands to the subject?
Yes. There was numerous officers were saying, "Get on the ground, get on the ground." Once the flashbang detonated, commands began. Get on the ground, get on the ground, get on the ground, which he never showed any intent of complying with those.
Okay. And these movements and these commands, are these typical training when you're taking someone into custody?
Yes.
Or I should say typical practice?
Yes.
Being in the position that you're in and the job that you have you
seen before when dog handlers release their dogs for apprehension?
Yes.
Okay. Is it typical for a dog to go up to a subject and then immediately come back to the dog handler once it's been released?
I don't. I've seen canines deployed, but I don't know enough about canines. Nor have I been involved in enough canine apprehensions to answer that. I can't speak on behalf of the dog or the handler. I don't know their training, and I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
Okay. When Weimer-Skirch released his dog and the dog got up to the subject, about how close do you think you guys got to him, the subject?
We were close. When I saw that his knives come out, and I said Weimer-Skirch was in front of me, I know I was within 20, 25 feet when the knives came out. Weimer-Skirch was in front of me. I know by the time I stepped around Weimer-Skirch and was able to engage the male, we were closer than that. I would say within 10 to 12 feet.
Have you ever had any training or experience on when encountering a subject with, like, say, an edged weapon or knife like that, and what the distance between you and him and kind of like the threat level
The
is?
21-foot tour drill.
Exactly.
Yes, sir. That was skewed as a result of us being on the hillside. The downward angle was twice the distance, but the reactionary gap is cut half because of the momentum that he gains as he moves towards, moves in the downhill grade.
Okay. So it would be different than, say, if he was on a street or a sidewalk. That's
Yes.
pretty level.
Yes, sir.
So when you guys are moving up towards him, the dog has come back, and he now has taken his knives out and put him at chest level.
Yes, sir.
What did you think he was going to do at that point?
It was at that point that, with the statements he had made, his aggressive maneuvers towards us, our close proximity is, I was in fear for myself, for Scott Weimer-Skirch, for Rick Ingram, that one of them would have been seriously injured or fatally wounded at that point.
Okay. So you thought that he was getting stabbed one of you guys?
Yes, sir.
So you'd mentioned that when you finally moved into a position where you could take your shot, you said he had moved kind of to the left.
It wasn't when I gained my position. It was, I was up. I had my reticle for my optics, center mass. I remember seeing the gap on his chest in my optics. I had disengaged safety on my rifle, and I'd made the conscious decision to fire my rifle. As I was going through this, he began to move his body to the left. As I'm processing that, I'm thinking to myself, he's going to try to flank around the dog and move, I guess, to the east and then to the south in a quick little button hook maneuver in order to get the dog from in between him and us. Now, that would have taken the way that, with the rocks and the way that Weimer-Skirch and I were situated, it would have taken a lot of time to recover and adjust and address him had he. So in my mind and my perception is that was his plan. As he was turning to the left, I fired my first shot, center mass, and followed it immediately with the second shot. And after this, I remember pulling the trigger twice, coming off the trigger with my finger, and staying on him in my optics. He was still standing. He was still had motor skills. I put my finger on the trigger and fired a third time. As I did that, that's when I saw his body fall forward and land on his stomach.
Okay. Were you able to see, and I know you're training on your optic now, but were you able to see if he ever dropped the knives at any time?
He did not.
Okay.
And
so
I know that because as we approached him once he was on the ground, both knives, he was still clenching both knives. It's not like they were laying in his hand. He was clenching them still in both his right and left hand.
Okay. While this was going on, do you know if anyone else around you shot?
I didn't hear other shots. That can go to the auditory exclusion. But once we had gone up and Dominic Pettis and I cleared the area where his belongings were, and the rock formations up there, it was at that point that Dominic said, I need to get myself off this mountain. And I turned and asked him, did you shoot also? He said, yes, that was it. That was the end of our conversation. And then I walked down, he walked down, and I didn't see him again the rest of the night.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else, Keith, that you think is important that I have not asked you?
You want to take a break?
Please.
Okay. Let's go ahead and end the interview right there. Right now it's 17:19 hours. All right. It's Detective Stone with APD. We're back here on the record interviewing Detective Keith Standy. Keith, did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we conclude for today?
I did. I wanted to clarify on positioning and terrain. So, despite our attempts to get to an area where we were on level ground, he was still elevated and at an advantageous position. The game trail between he and the team, myself, Ingram and Weimer-Skirch, is narrow. It's only wide enough for one person.
Okay.
Once the canine was deployed, the male assumed his aggressive stance, armed with knives in both hands. Because of the geographics, Officer Weimer-Skirch was positioned in front of me, and I had to position myself in front of him to prevent the male from carrying out his threats and stabbing either myself, Officer Weimer-Skirch, or Detective Ingram. So when I maneuvered around him, the terrain was tough to navigate during that time. There was rocks. It was kind of a hilly kind of with cactus. It made negotiating in that area tough.
Okay. So with this, the area you guys were operating in, which, like you're saying, is real steep and has a lot of terrain, would be a lot different than what you guys are usually used to operating in out here in the city?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? No. All right. Let's go ahead and end the interview at 17:31 hours.